Alec Baldwin, An Angry Narcissist, Part 6. The New York Times reported, shortly before the cinematographer Halyna Hutchins was fatally shot on a film set in the foothills of New Mexico, she smiled at the camera as she recorded herself riding a chestnut horse through the desert brush. "One of the perks of shooting a Western is you get to ride horses on your day off," Ms. Hutchins wrote in an Instagram post. On Thursday, Ms. Hutchins, 42, was killed when the actor Alec Baldwin discharged a firearm being used as a prop on the set of Rust, a Western about a teenage boy who goes on the run with his grandfather after the accidental killing of a local rancher. Ms. Hutchins, the film's director of photography, died after being flown to the University of New Mexico's hospital in Albuquerque. The film's director, Joel Souza, was injured in the shooting and was released from a hospital. Friends in Ukraine, where Ms. Hutchins is originally from, described her as spirited, someone whose talents had propelled her from that country to success in Hollywood, but who never forgot her home. She was proud of her heritage, they said, and returned regularly to visit. Yana Nastoli, a friend from college, described her as an ambitious, focused woman with intelligent eyes and a sincere smile. She could have been among the top Hollywood stars on camera, not behind it, Ms. Nastoli said. Ms. Hutchins grew up on a Soviet military base in the Arctic Circle, where, according to her personal website, she was surrounded by reindeer and nuclear submarines. She studied economics at the Agrarian University in Ukraine before switching to a journalism program at Kiev National University. She later attended the American Film Institute Conservatory in Los Angeles. Andrei Semenyuk, a friend and fellow Ukrainian cinematographer, said in an interview with Detector Media, a media organization in Ukraine, that even as her career blossomed in Hollywood, she made a point of embracing her background, making an effort to help fellow Ukrainians in California. He called her death a stupid, shocking loss. The Ukrainian Foreign Ministry said on Friday that the country's consulate in Los Angeles was trying to contact Ms. Hutchins' relatives. Also on Friday, Alec Baldwin released a statement on social media saying, "There are no words to convey my shock and sadness regarding the tragic accident that took the life of Halyna Hutchins, a wife, mother, and a deeply admired colleague of ours." He said that he's in contact with Ms. Hutchins' husband, adding, "My heart is broken for her husband, their son, and all who knew and loved Halyna." Among filmmakers in the United States, Ms. Hutchins was remembered as a skilled cinematographer with an artistic vision who was deeply committed to her work. The statement released by Mr. Baldwin, ordinarily you might think that was him exhibiting empathy for the loss of the individual who was killed as a consequence of a gun fired by him. Now, of course, there is no suggestion whatsoever that Mr. Baldwin deliberately sought to kill her and that this was an accident, although there are, of course, questions of negligence that have been raised. Those are matters for examination elsewhere. The point is, with this analysis, is did Mr. Baldwin write that material with any empathy, or basically was this done as a means of asserting control? Well, as you've listened to the previous 5 parts, which show demonstrably, through repeated examples of his behaviour over a sustained period of time, that he is indeed a narcissist, and that this behaviour is merely an attempt to demonstrate that he appears to be a kind and concerned individual. Of course, he brings it back to him by talking about his heart being broken. He has no empathy for the individual concerned, but believes that he exhibits some. Albeit, this is not a gushing tribute. It is not something that exhibits somebody who's well practiced in the use of a facade. ABC News reported, Alec Baldwin spoke out for the first time on camera since last week's deadly shooting on the set of the film Rust, calling it a 1 in a trillion episode. The actor discharged the antique revolver during a dress rehearsal for the Western, killing the film's cinematographer, Halyna Hutchins, and wounding its director, Joel Souza. In a nearly 4-minute exchange with a reporter from Backgrid Saturday, outside his Vermont home, with his wife by his side, Baldwin said he is fully cooperating with police and talks to them every day. He said he has been ordered by authorities not to answer any questions about the investigation into the shooting which occurred on October the 21st at the Bonanza Creek Ranch near Santa Fe, New Mexico. "I'm not allowed to make any comments because it's an ongoing investigation," Baldwin said in the video. "I've been ordered by the Sheriff's Department in Santa Fe, I can't answer any questions about the investigation. I can't. Therefore, why on earth are you appearing on video? Why indeed are you speaking? Well, of course, that's all about the assertion of control. The presence of the reporters is a threat to his control, and his narcissism causes him to need to do something. And, therefore, it causes him to have to want to speak to them. And he stated, as the article reports, "We're eagerly awaiting the results of the Sheriff's Department's investigation." The star, who was also a co-producer on the film, spoke about Hutchins, 42, who was struck in the chest and died after being airlifted to a hospital. "She was my friend. She was my friend," Baldwin said, again making it all about him. "The day I arrived in Santa Fe to start shooting, I took her to dinner with Joel, the director." Grandiosity. "We were a very, very, well-oiled crew shooting a film together, and then this horrible event happened," he added. Baldwin said he's in constant contact with Hutchins' husband, Matthew Hutchins, and discussed meeting with him and their 9-year-old son after the deadly shooting. "I wouldn't know how to characterise it," Baldwin said. "The guy is overwhelmed with grief. There are incidental accidents on films sets from time to time, but nothing like this," he added. "This is a 1 in a trillion episode. It's a 1 in a trillion event, and he is in shock." Again, him describing it as such is a deflection of any accountability on his behalf, driven by his narcissism. At one point in the interview, the reporter forgot Hutchins' name, prompting Baldwin's wife, Hilaria Baldwin, to say, "Her name is Halyna. If you're spending this much time waiting for us, you should know her name. Her name is Halyna." Baldwin released a statement a day after the incident, saying in a Twitter post, "There are no words to convey my shock and sadness regarding the tragic accident that took the life of Halyna Hutchins, a wife, mother, and deeply admired colleague of ours. My heart is broken for her husband, their son, and all who knew and loved Halyna." Production of Rust was paused after the shooting. When asked if he thought production would start up again, Baldwin said, "No, I doubt it." The actor said he doesn't know if he would ever work on another film set involving firearms again. Pity play. But that efforts to limit the use of firearms on sets is something I'm extremely interested in. Assertion of control in that moment by false compassion. Santa Fe County Sheriff Adam Mendoza said this week that investigators suspect a real bullet was loaded in the firearm that Baldwin discharged. An assistant director handed the gun to Baldwin while proclaiming "cold gun" to let the crew know a gun with no live rounds was being used, according to a search warrant affidavit. The assistant director told investigators he did not know there were any rounds in the gun he gave to Baldwin, according to the warrant. 3 guns, the Colt revolver, an apparently non-functioning .45 caliber revolver, and a plastic non-functioning prop gun were seized from the scene, along with 500 rounds of ammunition that included a mix of blanks, dummy rounds, and live rounds, according to Mendoza. Santa Fe District Attorney Mary Carmack Alves said no decision has been made on whether charges were filed and that no one has been ruled out at this point. Any decision to bring charges would take weeks or months, she said. Now, let's have a look at the footage of that Roadside interview, because it also demonstrates more behaviours which can be interpreted through the prism of the understood narcissism of Alec Baldwin.
I'm not allowed to make any comments because it's an ongoing investigation. I've been ordered by the Sheriff's Department in Santa Fe. I can't answer any questions about the investigation. I can't. Okay. It's an active investigation in terms of a woman dying. She was my friend. She was my friend. The day I arrived in Santa Fe to start shooting, I took her to dinner with Joel, the director.
Halting the footage after 23 seconds, we see that Baldwin immediately talks over the reporter, which demonstrates his need to dominate the conversation, to assert control, and his lack of boundary recognition. And he starts explaining that he's not allowed to make any comments, and that this is because the Sheriff's Department has in effect told him that he's not allowed to talk about the investigation because it's an active investigation. Now, this is clearly correct. However, remember that he is being asked questions by reporters. Those questions will be challenge fuel. They are giving him an emotional response to his presence, therefore he's receiving fuel. That isn't a problem. But their questioning of him unconsciously threatens his sense of control. So his unconscious narcissism necessarily then has to assert control or nullify the threat to control. And so he does so, first of all, by talking over the reporter, and then by triangulating the reporters with what he's been told by the sheriff's department as the reason why he's not going to answer those questions. What the sheriff's department has said is likely to be true, and this is an example of a narcissist using the truth as understood by everybody else to his advantage. And I've spoken to you many times about how the narcissist uses either the truth, the half-truth, and nowhere near the truth. And if you haven't done so, you really ought to listen to that video, The Truth, the Half-Truth, and Nowhere Near the Truth. Of course, what then happens is Baldwin then needs to bring it back to it being all about him. She was my friend. And then talks about taking her to dinner. Not talking about how this is a tragic incident and I just want to be left alone to think about it. And I obviously can't talk about it because of what the sheriff has said. He then has to talk about himself because of his level of self-absorption.
We were a very, very...
Halting on 28 seconds, we see that his wife, Halyna Baldwin, comes over, perhaps to try and stop him speaking about what he's saying. And he dismisses her immediately by saying, excuse me, he's not going to be dissuaded from saying what he's saying, and he's not going to halt in issuing his monologue to the reporters. Sense of entitlement, need to assert control, and his wife's interjection is a threat to his control, and therefore he dismisses her with a rather abrupt, excuse me, causing her to scuttle out of the way.
You know, well-oiled crew shooting a film together, and then this horrible event happened. Now, I've been told multiple times, don't make any comments about the ongoing investigation, and I can't. That's it.
And you met
What
with,
what other questions do you have other than that?
You met with the...
Halting on 46 seconds, after brushing aside his wife's attempted interruption, Baldwin then continues with his monologue, talking about the fact that they were a well-oiled machine, etc., and then again reiterating the fact that the sheriff's department's instruction means he can't talk about anything else. And he uses that truth as a means to assert control over the reporters. His wife drifts back into shot again as he then talks over the reporters as they attempt to ask a question. They have to wait until he's done, and he then invites them to ask further questions on matters which are not related to the investigation itself. Here, he has control. He shut down his wife's intervention. He talked over the reporter. He talked about what he wants to talk about. He talked over the reporters again and has told them that I'm not talking about the investigation because I can't. But now you can ask me about anything else. He remains in control at this juncture.
I'm afraid I forget her name at the moment, but you met with her family in the
Halyna.
day?
Yes,
her
I
name
met
is
with her
Halyna. If you're spending this much time waiting for us, you should
don't
know
know
her
her
name.
name?
Her name is Halyna.
Halyna Hutchins. I met with her husband Matthew and her son. Yeah, that's right.
And how did that meeting go?
I wouldn't know how to characterize that. They're mortified.
You guys, you know what? No details.
But do me a favor. I'm gonna answer the question.
Pausing at 1 minute and 8 seconds. The reporter then stumbles, forgetting Halyna's name. And, of course, this prompts Halyna Baldwin to jump in, commenting that you're following us around and asking all these questions and you don't even know her name. And, of course, Alec Baldwin also reacts in a similar way to that mistake being made by the reporter. He's asked about the circumstances of a meeting that he's had, and he describes that he doesn't know how to characterise the meeting, which is demonstrative of his absence of emotional empathy. His wife then continues to try and talk, which of course threatens his control, which then causes him to need to rebut his wife once again by turning her and dismissively telling her that he's going to answer the questions and gesturing for her to move aside, thus once again nullifying the threat to control posed by her interruption.
Well, I appreciate that he was probably very upset.
The guy is overwhelmed with grief. This is something that there are incidental accidents on film sets from time to time, but nothing like this. This is a 1 in a trillion episode. It's a 1 in a trillion event. And so he is in shock. He has a 9-year-old son. We are in constant contact with him because we're very worried about his family and his kid. And I said, we're eagerly awaiting for the Sheriff's Department to tell us what their investigation has yielded. What else do you have?
Halting at 1 minute 45, Baldwin continues explaining that how he understands that the husband of the deceased lady feels, makes reference to the son, and again talks about the fact that he's in constant contact, demonstrating that he has control of this situation. And a couple of cars drive by, momentarily distracting him as he continues with his wife walking in front of the camera. Notice as well, of course, when she spoke, her Spanish accent seemed to have disappeared, and I wonder if she remembered the word for cucumber as she was stood there. But those are thoughts for another day. Again, at the end of this segment, you'll notice that the demeanour of Baldwin is quite belligerent, and once again, remember, he has chosen to speak to these individuals. They don't appear to have been hounding him down the street. He's chosen to stop and talk to them. And in those circumstances, it's evident that he's done so in order to assert control. And again, he asks, what else have you got for me? Haughty, arrogant, but he's controlling the narrative and remaining in control of this situation that is unfolding in this short interview.
Would you ever work on another film set that involves firearms of that nature?
I couldn't answer that question. I really don't have any. I have no sense of that at all. I do know that an ongoing effort to limit the use of firearms on film sets is something I'm extremely interested in. Yeah, where are you? But remember something that I think is important, and that is how many bullets have been fired in films and TV shows in the last 75 years? This is America. How many bullets have gone off in movies and on TV sets before? How many billions in the last 75 years? And nearly all of it without incident.
The final section of this short interview, Baldwin is talking about where he's asked whether he will continue to be involved in film. He dismisses that and then goes on to talk about how he'd be interested in limiting the involvement of guns on sets in the future. Notice again his wife wanders into shot and appears to be answering on his behalf or attempting to do so. This time, because she doesn't speak, it isn't necessary for him to nullify the threat to control posed by an interruption from her. He then, of course, goes to talking about the fact that, as he mentioned in the earlier segment also, that a tragic incident of this nature is very rare indeed. And he makes the valid point that lots of bullets have been used in films over the last 75 years, and indeed across all of the various productions that take place, and that so few incidents of this nature do occur. That is accurate, and he's going to the evidence to demonstrate that this is an unusual incident that has occurred. Again, remember, this isn't being done for any emotional empathy for the victim, but is basically his narcissism again utilising the evidence, and evidence that is accepted as the truth by many people, in order to deflect any accountability on his behalf, to suggest that there is any culpability applicable to him. And therefore this short interview, seen through the prism of his narcissism, is useful in demonstrating his need to assert control, how he deals with threats to his control, and is commensurate with, of course, the narcissism which is governing all of his interaction with other people, the reporters, and also his wife, Spanish or not. Understandably, there is a lot of speculation and observation about Alec Baldwin's behaviour, and some of it comes courtesy of the Daily Soap Dish, which reports, what is Alec Baldwin trying to prove? That's what a lot of fans can't help but wonder, as a Hollywood actor was spotted with Halyna Hutchins' widow and son only a few days after he accidentally killed the cinematographer with a prop gun on the set of his new film Rust. Halyna Hutchins, 42, died after he was shot by the actor and later died from her injuries at a nearby hospital. But this weekend, Alec was spotted leaving a Santa Fe, New Mexico hotel with Halyna's husband, Matthew Hutchins, and their son, Andros. This comes after reports said that Alec was hysterical and absolutely inconsolable for hours after he killed Halyna. One source close to the situation told People, this was pretty devastating, adding that Baldwin plans on cancelling all of his future projects. This is how he handles difficult times. Whenever something bad happens, in the short term, he removes himself from the public eye. Nullification of threat to control by withdrawal. The insider added this, but only after Baldwin was spotted in a very public photo op with Halyna's family. Therefore, there's hypocrisy straight away, talking about withdrawing, but then also appearing in a photo opportunity. The article explains, of course, it didn't take very long for the actor's critics and detractors to weigh in on the matter. Many of them, who wrote on social media, "It's all about framing the picture for the PR, just like yelling, 'Who handed me a hot gun?' immediately diverts blame away from himself. Narcissists do not know how to act normally. They can do a good job after years of study of faking it, but when something unusual happens, they haven't observed that and don't know how to fake it, and their lack of empathy for others, and their all-consuming pity for themselves, mean they get it all horribly wrong. How does a child behave when they get it wrong? Hurl themselves on the floor crying, hoping to elicit sympathy. And that person's observation is not particularly wide of the mark." Another critic put it this way, the article explains. "I was appalled that all these people on demonstrations for better safety, all the people leaving flowers and going to a vigil, the actor who pulled a trigger, none of them met this little boy and his dad at the airport and helped with the luggage, so this little boy could hold his daddy's hand. And as a mum, I want to scoop him up and protect him from this press intrusion. And I think it's beyond disgusting that the poor child has been made to hug the man who killed his mother. Absolute peak narcissist for hysterical actor to make it all about him, not the little boy whose mother was killed. Man up, Baldwin." And again, the fact of causing him to offer a hug to this boy who has just lost his mother demonstrates an absence of emotional empathy, and that how it's about an assertion of control by appearing to look like he's a decent individual. This material clearly demonstrates, as I've explained prior to the shooting incident, that Alec Baldwin is indeed a narcissist, and his behaviour surrounding this incident and following on thereafter can be interpreted by you now through the lens of narcissism. It remains to be seen whether it will be chalked up as a terrible accident that has occurred, or whether there's a possibility of negligence charges being levelled at Baldwin perhaps, or others involved in the production of the film. There will doubtless be further reaction and responses, and you'll be able to now interpret those, understanding what Alec Baldwin is. If you'd like to understand which particular sub-school and cadre of narcissist that he is, use the link in the video description to this particular segment to be able to obtain detail where I explain to you his school and cadre and why, to continue your unrivaled education about narcissism. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.